Hi everyone, and welcome to this new episode of For Music, the Soundtrack podcast. I'm George, and today I'm here with Jamie Christopherson, who's written music for Metal Gear Rising, Lineage 2, the Total War franchise, the Lord of the Rings, Battle for Middle-earth, and many others, including additional music for Homeland, which is, by the way, one of my favorite TV shows. So, hello, Jamie. Welcome to the podcast. And I just want to say that we are so glad to have you on board.
Hello, Georgia, and thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited about it.
Our pleasure. So, you've worked on quite a lot of projects, video game stuff, film music, TV music. What's the main difference, in your opinion, between all those?
Well, yeah, they each have their own challenges, obviously, and differences. Obviously, with video games, the main difference is the interactivity part. So, actually having the technology as a part of the music, it's a lot more than film and TV because, it's interactive. So there's an audio engine that is using your music and manipulating it in ways, hopefully, in real time that go along with various player movements. So that's the main difference there. And then there's a zillion ways to use that technology to your advantage. But yeah, that's what I would say is the main thing, the interactivity.
And have you found out that your personal creative process of writing music, actually composing, is different, whether it's interactive music or just like film music, which is kind of linear?
I would say, yes, it is different for what media it is. It's also different for the style of genre that the music is in. So if I'm writing like, a small indie film, for example, I'll try and just limit my palette to whatever small set of instruments. I like to, try and set limits on what I can do with the technology because it is endless, So
yeah,
it's good to have little limits, whether technological or instrumental wise
or financial. When it
financial is a big one, and as well, yes, exactly. When I work on small budget films, and especially when it comes to live orchestra, and we can get into that, like how do you use that money to the best of its advantage?
Yeah, and when you speak about the engines, for example, on game music, are you familiar with, for example, Wise or FMOD? Do you know ways to implement the music, or do you leave this to the audio directors and the audio teams of the games?
Yeah, I think I know because I'm friends with the guys at Wise from a long time ago. So I know the capabilities. I try and keep afloat on like what the system is capable of doing with either audio stems, triggering, and maybe they're implementing MIDI, which I haven't got into too much, but I think it's just good to understand the concept of it. And I did toy around with it a lot earlier in my career, but then I just decided I really like the creativity part of it. So I'll either have someone help me, or usually these game companies have an audio person in-house that is kind of doing that because they can work closer with the team as new builds come in.
Sure.
So I feel like just having that communication when I start a game project, have a communication about, how do we want to approach the interactive part of the music and the stems, because there are different approaches to doing that. And then it's kind of up to them on how they want to do it. And oftentimes they'll do things that, that I wouldn't have even thought of. Like, for example, in Metal Gear Rising, and we can get into how important that was in the video game.
Yeah, and there's quite a lot of layers, I suppose, there, because it's a mixture of different styles. Amazing soundtrack, by the way. There's one thing that I can tell you from a purely soundtrack geek perspective that really annoys me is that the only way to see your name is if you click on the show credits and you did the whole music. It's like the pop culture where you would get only the singer referenced in a track somewhere, and not the the people who actually did the whole thing.
Yeah. I know.
Yeah, but yeah, I have a funny story for this. The soundtrack for Surviving Mars, when it was released, they completely messed everything up with the Spotify release. In terms of my name and so forth and so forth, and I told them, okay, you need to fix this, because that's not my name, and they said, oh, all right, so they fixed it with another typo in the name. So yeah, but yeah, do tell me about Metal Gear Rising, because that's for those of you who haven't listened to the music, that's like a combination of like metal band plus synthesizers plus orchestra. So it's really cool. I've played the game a bit, and what I think is what I remember, because it was a while ago. So what I remember was that it was really dynamic. So really, really dynamic.
Yes. Yeah, we could. I'll talk about that. I will say one thing, going back to the Spotify that you just mentioned about the basically the metadata wrong. The Metal Gear Rising soundtrack is not listed under my name. It's listed under each singing artist's name right now, which is interesting. However, like when the soundtrack was first released, when the game came out, it was with one company called Something Music, which was owned by Nile Rodgers, the amazing record producer. But then when that went out of business, so on the original release, it was under my name. So every track had my name as the artist. But then it was taken down when the record company went out of business, and then Konami re-released it like 2 years later or something like that, and fixed all this stuff, which I do agree it should be under the artists, which is singers.
Yeah.
I would argue that I would be one of the artists on the tracks, but
yeah, or like a feature or something.
Yeah,
but
a feature or a co-artist. Yeah. So, but I didn't have any choice in that. It's funny because people think that I had that sometimes when we as artists and composers do these work for hires, that we have, basically a say in the metadata, which we don't.
That's right. Well, this actually turned into a interesting direction, because I've also had, most of the stuff that I've personally done. I think only Victor Run is something that I released myself. Have you had anything that you like released and published yourself, or?
Yes, actually, I started my own record label.
Oh, that's nice. Okay.
It's called Coda Wave Records, and I only started it about a little over a year ago. But the main intent of it is to release, especially some of the smaller soundtracks that I've done on my label that maybe the smaller production companies wouldn't even think about releasing. But maybe I'll get into games at some point. But yes, so I have released a few albums.
So how does that work? You make direct deals with like Spotify, and you submit without using a third party, or?
Well, you have to use a distributor. So I use like DistroKid.
DistroKid, okay. Mm-hmm.
Which is a very simple one. A lot of people use it, but there's a zillion other distributors. You have to go through some kind of a distributor to get things on streaming.
Well, that's really interesting, because this is something that is kind of neglected in game music. Obviously, all the releases, and I've even had like discussions where people would say, "Oh, it's not worth making a release because even if it's streamed like millions, that's like the money is just not worth it for them, like for a big company," which is weird.
I've heard it several times as well, and I disagree with it. And I think that even beyond just the monetary value of the music is that there's a marketing aspect and things that tie in. We can go back even to Metal Gear Rising. The soundtrack, from what I've heard, like on YouTube and things like that, is the soundtrack made people kind of interested to play the game, which is very interesting. So they would hear not know anything about the game, but then go look it up on stream or on Steam and and play it there and then really like it. So I do think that there is a tie-in between music marketing and things like that. And then in addition to that, there's music is one of those things that has its own intrinsic value beyond a project. So with soundtracks, but also with licensing for other content. For example, the stuff I did for like EA games, I did some Lord of the Rings games and Command and Conquer stuff. And the guy in charge of the music there is Steve Schnurr, who's very, very smart about knowing the value of music beyond just the scope of having it in a video game. I mean, he understands both the importance, through especially their sports games of break artists, but then he also understands the value of music just on its own. So he basically got a deals with EA soundtracks and licensing companies like APM.
Okay, all right.
So my music that I wrote for Lord of the Rings is in a zillion TV shows because it's just it's in the library, and then these TV shows have licenses with APM to use the music. So I see a lot of value in the music I wrote for that beyond the video game.
That's clever. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very clever, and I just don't understand why video game companies don't capitalize on that music.
But how does that work? Because initially, when you get like library music, especially if it's I don't know, extreme music or APM or Universal or whatever, you would have like the percentage split between you and the actual library or sub publisher, or the company who actually produces the tracks. So in this case, would, for example, EA take a split of it, or is it the different different entity?
I'm not privy to what the deal is with, for example, EA and APM, what their deal is. But I do know that EA, it has its own music publishing company. So, for example, if a track of mine that they have in the APM library ends up in like a TV show, right?
Yeah.
We each kind of get a split, whatever that split is. So writing share and a publishing share.
This is very, very clever. This is very clever. I've never thought about this, because usually games are work for hire and that's it. It stays there. And library music, especially for example, I don't know, reality shows, they need a lot of action-packed stuff.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right. That was a nice thing I learned today. So let's get back to on topic of Metal Gear Rising and all the stems inside. Do you remember how many? First of all, is the dynamic music like horizontal or vertical or both? So like different segments and then stems and layers.
For that one, it was both.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I just delivered all the stems to them. It was probably only about 10 or 12 tracks wide at the widest. Mm-hmm. So breaking them down by instrumentation, and sometimes in a few layers, like if there's synths, like maybe a lead synth and then pulsing synths, things like that, so that they could have some more control. And then they kind of went about their thing in-house.
Yeah, to make it dynamic. Mm.
As far as how to program these things, and it's what they did in that game is one of the reasons why it is so popular and why it had such an impact. Because when you get to the height of the boss battles, the vocals kick in and things like that, which really gave people like kind of like an adrenaline rush, right? So
yeah. And it's very different to what the original was. That was Harry Gregson Williams, correct? So
yeah, I guess it is different, related in some ways to just the general world of synth and orchestra, but then we put on a bunch of other stuff.
So how would you write those songs? I suppose it needed like a live band to be recorded. I mean, everything sounds recorded to me. Maybe I'm wrong. But...
We had a lot of live heavy metal musicians for sure. Things, and vocalists. So yeah, but then there's just a ton of synths. I mean, it's just very wide mixes. Yeah.
All right. So the synths are those like analog or software synthesizers?
Oh, I'm pretty sure they were all software synths.
Software synths. All right. Yeah, it makes it much easier when it comes to going back and forth on the mixes and making changes. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then the orchestra on top.
Yeah, which was synthesizer as well on that one. There was no live orchestra.
There's no live. All right. Well, I couldn't tell actually, because obviously in such a dense mix, it would be like a cover. It will like the main thing that's presented in the track.
Yes, that's an important point that you make. Is sometimes in the bigger sounding mixes, it's easier to get away with the synths. But the intimate scores and things like that, that's when you really need, and when they need that clarity and that sense of space. You need that live. So,
what are your thoughts on sample libraries?
All of yours. No, I'm just kidding. No, I do, of course, use a lot of your stuff. I think I've only scratched the surface, but like I used Wotan Choir for a video game. That'll be coming out next year, and that was very good because it just had that epic sound, and but I like how the syllables are like wordless, or they're not like Latin, and
they're made up. Yeah.
They're made up syllables, which is important for film composing, right? For most of it, and game composing, yeah. But yeah, as far as libraries, I just have just as many as everyone else. I don't know. There's nothing too crazy.
Yeah. Speaking of which, do you think that there is a danger, so to say, that when using commercial libraries, so if you buy something from, let's say, Spitfire or East West or whatever company there is out there, you would have a few thousand other people who would basically have the same sounds as you. So do you make like your custom sample libraries?
Yeah, I think the danger is in the phrase libraries, right?
Yes.
So
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Whenever you have the phrases that just everyone is using, that's when everything starts to sound the same. And I did learn that lesson a little early on in my career. I won't say the project name or anything, but like I used like a library that had some phrases, and after the game was released, the game company got like a letter from another composer that had also bought the same sample library that used the same phrase, and he claimed that they were his compositions because he used that same sample library.
That's a bit.
So it was very awkward because then the client was like, "Wait, I thought you recorded these new. Why are they from a sample library?"
Oh,
so
yikes!
Yeah, you do have to be careful of those things. Yeah, I try whenever possible to use very generic stuff that's like underneath, or record my own stuff.
Yeah. There was this video on YouTube. I remember watching this a while back, which was 6 or 7 different game soundtracks, and all have the same like fiddle sound. They're like early 2000-ish soundtracks, and I think it was like a CD sample library, something from Best Service, I think. So it was the same. Obviously, it sounded different because the mix is different, but the phrase is the same kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
Early on, there was like some orchestral maneuver library that like everyone was using, and like you could still hear it in like so many TV shows. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, the same goes to like action streaks and libraries that are loop based. One of the most awkward things that we had to orchestrate. I would no, awkward is not the right word, but like the most tense project that we've done was we had to orchestrate like a Chinese soundtrack, and we had about 1 hour of music and just a couple of days to go through the scores. So we would open, the projects just to start quantizing and preparing stuff for Sibelius. And then, turns out that they've used a lot of action strings, but combining different rhythms together. So essentially the MIDI was just one note, like one E going through the whole song, and then a bunch of rhythms coming in together. It sounded cool because it was like polyrhythmic stuff, but then you have to figure it all out, and so that was tedious. All right. So, I want to ask you so many things about the games, but before that, I just want to ask you a bit about Homeland. You've worked on Homeland, right?
Yeah, I did some additional music for the main composer, Sean Callery.
Which are you allowed to say which season that was, or?
I don't know if I am actually, but it was a few seasons ago. I mean, over now, right? But
nice.
I think it was the season before the last season or something.
All right. And how do you, because you've also worked as a co-writer and like guest composer on many games. I'll get into that. But how do you work in such a case? So in the case of Homeland, I suppose you have picture, but do you also have like references as to like general style, like lines that you need to follow, like stylistic lines?
When you come on like as someone assisting the main composer, you need to like get into the mindset of just trying to support, and assimilate what they've already established. And so that's your main job, is just trying to get as close to that, while doing your own thing, but it's got to be seamless into whatever they're doing. So that's the main goal there, and it's too unsimilar to like what I did on the Lord of the Rings video games, where I didn't coordinate with Shore, right, Howard Shore, but sure. I just studied for like a few weeks the soundtrack, what harmonies he was using, what tonalities. So it's similar in that way, where you just kind of trying to get into the headspace of another composer.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, this is hard, isn't it? Or
yeah, it is challenging. Of course, you can't get rid of like your sentimentality, but yeah, you can definitely shift it. And one of the biggest compliments that I got on Lord of the Rings games was that people I guess had trouble like differentiating where the film came score
okay
score from and where my new tracks were from, and that was a great compliment that it fit into that world.
Nice. And have you written any new themes for the Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, so we definitely wrote some new themes. That's another point, is I wasn't allowed to use any of the themes from the games. I mean, from the films. So
okay.
They licensed a few tracks, I think, from the films, but as far as the new music, we weren't allowed to use any of the themes. So basically we had to use the harmonic language and the approach, but compose new themes.
That's interesting. All right. This is kind of. Are you familiar with the new show that came out, The Rings of Power?
I'm familiar. I haven't seen it yet, though.
Yeah, I haven't seen it as well. But as far as I know, they haven't licensed Lord of the Rings. They've licensed the Silmarillion, but they've also licensed like an appendix of the Lord of the Rings. At the end of the book, there's like this appendix. So everything that's inside, they can use. And turns out that, for example, hobbits or Gandalf were not in that appendix. So that's why they had to change the name of the hobbits to Harfoots or whatever. So yeah, weird stuff. So In the case of the Lord of the Rings, that was, I suppose, recorded, right?
The first one was. The second one was not.
Mm-hmm. And but you have to provide, I suppose, but you have to provide demos for the people responsible for like the so-called decision makers.
Of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And these are done with sample libraries and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Have you had a situation where you would actually record a demo in order to, if something that you have in your mind cannot be achieved with samples, for example?
I've only done that like 2 or 3 times. Yes. Mm-hmm. Like you mean to get the project demo?
Yeah, I wasn't even talking about like a demo submission, but something that would be really, really hard to achieve with samples. So you would get that section recorded so that it could be that musical. Let me just give you an example of like musical example. I don't know, this might sound stupid, but if you want to do something like tira, 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 you could possibly do this with samples, but it will sound very bad, I think.
Yes. Although, yeah, I mean, I guess you could, but if it's with the full orchestra, it's too much money.
Yeah.
To do that before everything is kind of approved and at the very end stage.
Yeah.
That said, I think there have been a few times where I've done like effects recordings. So we'll do, first recording. Actually, this is something that I do quite often is like if I want specific sounds for a project, we'll do like a custom recording / sampling session before when I'm starting the project. So basically give me fresh tools. So sometimes they are like little phrases that I have an idea on, or just improvs over some ideas and things like that. And then I can use those when I'm composing to kind of inform the sound. So yeah, so I do often like at the beginning of a project.
Yeah. I actually, because the previous example I gave was really bad, but now I remember something that I did for a game that it didn't end up in the game after all, so it was a pointless decision. But still, it was again I made some sort of a loop toolkit based around the idea of an alarm, and I would record like. So like for example we have the first violin is doing that and then the second violin is coming in unison and then and so you would end up having like 2 voices and one is going more and more detuned. So I recorded in different keys, different tempi, and just so that I can use then those elements and put into the music. So,
exactly. Yeah. That's the kind of thing I do as well.
All right. Nice. And so when you end up, this also applies not only to game music but also to film music. What are the challenges during the recording sessions at the end?
Just time, like how much we have poured in the amount of time given, with the budget. That's the main challenge. I would say. Yeah. And then, I guess just after having experience with different orchestras, like you just kind of get what's going to be 90% of the time you understand what's going to be easy for them and what's going to be more of a challenge, They're odd meters or, if you're going to do jazz swing, things like that, different types of, or experiment around with things that are more aleatoric that can take extra time to get to your liking.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just knowing the orchestra that you're working with.
Okay. So when you speak about just now, when you spoke about aleatoric music and swing, could you tell us? This is a weird time to say this, but could you actually tell us about your music background? What led you to writing music?
Oh, okay. I mean,
at the middle of the podcast.
I mean, I grew up around music. My dad was a rock and roll bass player and my mom was musical, and so there was always music around, And so, but then when I was in high school, I did discover like jazz. I think it was early high school, and that just kind of blew my mind, opened me up. And so then I got really into jazz bands, little trios and things like that. But then at that same time, I discovered like film music.
Yeah.
And I did grow up in Los Angeles, and there was a few music people in my neighborhood. Even there's one guy. His name is David Schwartz. He's still working today, and but he lived like three doors down from me, and he had his studio in his garage. So I would just walk down there and just sit and watch him work. And so I saw that he was, how a working composer can kind of do it at an early age, and so that put the idea in my head that it's possible.
Sure. And how do you think that, for example, this love for jazz, has this been transferred to your writing style?
Well, for sure, yeah. Especially I improv a lot in my scores, or I have musicians improv, even classical musicians. We kind of take more of and that's a very common thing.
That's hard.
Yeah, but it's common in the film composing world, right? Like to write, have experimental sessions and things like that. But yeah, no, I do love anytime I can work on like a jazz score or something. I'm really happy. I've done it a few times. So
on film or on games?
I've done both.
Both, okay. Which game soundtrack is like a jazzy thing that
I'm trying to think. I've definitely done some kids game stuff. Let's see, either jazzy or like I worked on a game called Surf's Up where we did a lot of like reggae. And so
nice. All right.
We're doing a lot of kind of guitar improv stuff on top of reggae beats. It's fun. It's all like music is my opinion on it.
So essentially what you're just telling me is that in order for someone to be successful in writing music, it's not only about writing music, it's about listening to different styles and expanding your music vocabulary, so to say.
If that's what you want to do, if you want to work on different style projects, yes. I mean, there are some composers that only work really in one style or one genre, and they're very famous for it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've just
So I think there's kind of like one or the other type of approach, right? Like you'd be like the jack of all trades composer, or you'd be like the very specific, guy like a John Bryan, for example, like
sure,
where he's just working on this, that indie film sound, right?
Or for example, Charlie Clouser doing
Charlie Clouser. Maybe he's even gone outside of that dark sound, and like for example, like Trent Reznor, like who would have thought that in the recent years, like he would do a jazz Disney score, like
that was also strange for me. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but it's really cool to see someone like that. Just create some fresh music like out of after a long time of doing one style.
And since most of the people who will be listening, I suppose, won't know the amount of work that needs to be done on a video game soundtrack. So usually, how much music do you write per game if you're the sole composer?
Yeah, it varies pretty widely on what the game is. If it's a AAA big game, then a few hours of music.
And so, how much time do you have for this usually?
And that also, for video games, that also varies. Very often, like a project will a big game will be in like phases. So like you'll do one phase, then they'll kind of pause or design more of the game, and then you'll come back. Or if you're brought in later, then you'll just compose through it. But it varies pretty widely.
And tell us a bit more about the your experience with the Total War series.
Yeah, the Total War, Total War and Warhammer, all that. Yeah, so I've been doing a bunch, and I think that's how I got introduced to you guys is through doing an orchestra session for a Warhammer game for that series, and it's they've got an internal composer team, and then they also bring, because it's just a lot of music that they do.
Yeah.
For all the different factions. So I guess it's impossible to do it all internally. So that's where, myself and a few other composers come in to write a bunch of music for their factions and races and all that kind of stuff. But it's, it's big, epic, full choir and orchestra and things like that.
Yeah. It's and it's also nice games. The
last one did very well. The Warhammer 3.
And how does that work with so many writers on board? Do you have thematic material that you have to use, or specific sound, specific orchestration?
Yes, a little of both. So they have like a main theme established for that series, and so pepper that into the score in places. And then they have a pretty robust software like system that takes things and can create, from what my understanding, it can create like new music live from our stems. Mm-hmm. So it's basically infinite combination of things. And the way that's achieved is mainly by staying around like a tonal center.
And tempo, I suppose.
So yeah, tempo. Exactly. So tempo and tonal center. If you have those things, then you can mix and match different composers and different cues together.
All right. So, and this kind of leads me to a more philosophical question about music and listeners' experience to it. Because, for example, in the past, you would have like just very straightforward, simple linear music. Even like, I don't know, Super Mario. So we have like a track, and people will associate that track with the gaming, or they'll know the music by its form.
Yeah.
How does that work with interactive music? Does that work at all, or what do you think?
I'm not exactly sure on the question. So do you mean how does it affect different people, the interactive music?
Do you think that people would be able to associate music in its form, like linear form? So you would have like intro section, then the way you composed it. So basically it's like you have intro, then you have like the development, climax, and then you have a sort of an outro. Or you would have like ABA form or whatever. And when it's interactive, it every time depends on the way you play the game. So the form will be different every time.
Yes and no, because usually even if the music is interactive, there are always like benchmarks that you hit in a game. Like in a game, for example, from level to level. So if you are starting off, with an interactive music, but then you get closer to, a boss battle or something like that, usually you'll have like a triggered music event, or the music will change there to like battle music or something. So it is curated in a way that corresponds to the game. It's not always, you have benchmarks, like I said. So the experience, while it is different for each player, it's never that different.
Sure.
It's just, it always funnels you into whatever's happening in the game, or at least it should. But yeah, I know a few, indie games have maybe experimented with more of like true interactive music that just like is different for every player. But I would say the majority of video games is not like built like that.
Sure. But for example, based on what you said about the Total War system, if it really combines, from what I understood, like stems from one track, from like 4 stems from your track, and then it grabs a stem from another track, that becomes a new piece of music. So supposedly, if a gamer is listening to this and says, "Oh, this sounds really cool," and they try to look for it in the soundtrack, official soundtrack, it won't be available, so to say.
That is true. It won't be available in how they just heard it. Exactly. But it is still like in the same game world. So you know, maybe on the soundtrack, you know, there'll be a track that's similar to what they heard in that world, or that rate order. But yeah, there might be something that they hear that will most likely never be heard by anyone again.
Yeah, there was this.
Cool.
There was this game. I don't remember the name. It was something with planets, and the whole music was based around different. It's not even layers. I mean, it is layers essentially, but different elements that are combined into categories and like some sort of a meta tagging system. So whenever you go to a different location, so let's say like watery planet, and it's night, then it grabs elements from different places and it creates the music on the spot. And yeah, sorry.
No, I was saying that's cool. That sounds cool.
Yeah, it is. It does. And there was actually, you know, gamers who uploaded, like, so to say, soundtracks, official sound, like unofficial soundtracks, essentially. Hey, here's how my planet and everything that I did sounded like, and this is like a cool track. And then someone else said, so that this makes things very interesting in a way, and very different to what it was. Gaming was 15 or 20 years ago.
Yes. It's almost like using the video game to be like a music remixer.
Yes, in a way. Yeah. And are you a gamer yourself? Do you play games, or you don't have time?
I do once in a while. It is hard to find the time, but like you know, probably the last like full game that I played through was either like Uncharted, the last Uncharted, or I think I did also play Red Dead Redemption 2. I do like the open world games, and in that game also, you know, the soundtrack is doing a similar thing where it's just music is kind of creeping in and out, and it's always kind of changing.
Yeah. Well, Red Dead Redemption, I was playing for like a month or so, and I was like, oh, all right, because I also love open world games. And turns out I wasn't even on the main quest, so I was just doing something weird stuff. And I was like, okay, nothing happens in this game. And then a colleague of mine here for the studio said, okay, are you following the main quest? And I was like, I guess so. Do I? I mean, I don't know. Maybe I missed something. And I would, when it comes to working with the on those projects, the actual human interaction between you and whether it's a co-composer or a lead composer in a company, or if you're personally the main composer and you have to work with a producer, audio director, or a film director, how is there a difference between the video game world and film world in terms of requirements and communication?
Yes, and also each project is just different, depending on how they have it set up. Sometimes on video games, it's 2 or 3 people that you're interacting with. Sometimes it's just one, and then or funneled through one person. So then, you know, they have their kind of meetings on their own ends, and then give you ideally feedback that is just like clear and you know, whereas like whatever, if there was like a disagreement within a company on one person liking a cue and another person not, so like hopefully they can either resolve it on their own before telling me, because sometimes there's, you know, the expression "too many cooks in the kitchen."
Yes.
So sometimes that can be kind of good, but sometimes it can be confusing when there's too many opinions.
Sure.
So yeah, I feel like some of the best soundtracks in history, you know, movies and video games are just when it's one director and one composer, and they just put their minds together and come up with a vision that maybe not everyone loves, but it's very unified, right?
Yes.
And it's not too like watered down or stasis, just like something that's going to please everyone, something outside the box. Sometimes, that's why, that's when, I'm trying to think of some examples where, things like that, like maybe like Blade Runner or something like that, where it's just something very different that no one has ever done before, So yeah.
And in your experience in film, in the film world, do you have any directors that you work with like that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I've worked with a few directors like on multiple times, which is great because then there's a shorthand. Like we kind of I know what they like or what they're looking for differently in a new project. So yeah, there are definitely some directors that I work with.
And have you found your Spielberg?
Well, actually, there's a few directors I've worked with on a bunch of films with. One director, we just finished our 13th film. Well, 3 Christmas movies that are coming out this year, actually. His name is Alex Ravello. So we have 3 Christmas movies coming out. So films 11, 12, and 13.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah. But we've worked on so many different genres during our films together. And so we definitely have a shorthand and a trust, But, our films are, they do sound and look very different from each other,
Yeah. And people say that it's important for you to succeed in as a film composer, you have to go to LA and live in LA. Is that true nowadays?
I don't think that's true anymore. No. World is very open. Everything is done online, or a lot of it. Now it is good to have those, meetings in person. It's always best face to face. And, LA is great because you can just kind of randomly run into someone or be invited to something like in person. All right.
Yeah, but that's not the case with video games. Definitely. I mean, for films maybe, but for video games, that's a very open internet.
Yeah, right? Video games is way more spread all over the world. But the film market, is an international film market now as well. Yeah. For example, I'm in Norway right now, and I just came over because I scored a Norwegian horror film, and it's called Leave, and it just premiered here in Norway, and then it'll be going to other countries next year.
Nice.
Anyway, so I randomly met the producer in Los Angeles when he lived there, and I kind of saw the quality of Scandinavian content going up, and they've got a lot of deals with Netflix and similar streaming services, and I just really like the kind of the vibe that they're putting into their filmmaking and projects and TV shows and things like that. And so I've been pursuing that, and so finally I got to score my first Norwegian film. So that's my first international kind of film. I've worked on international video games, for sure, a lot of them. So yeah, I think just it's a global market now, and so you can live anywhere as long as you go to conferences, you go to.
And do you think that's important? Do you go to conferences like to Gamescom or?
Yeah, I think a game developers conference is very important if you want to be a game composer. That's a great one to go to, especially when you're starting out. It's very important.
And normally, do you do? We kind of briefly talked about this earlier. Do you do demo submissions or pitches?
I still do pitches. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have an agent or?
I don't at the moment, but I have in the past, and I do have people that kind of do agency type things. So they'll trying to introduce me to someone, and so they do act as an agent. But no, I don't have a full-time agent.
So then, when you have the pitch request, you write the music. Do you record it, or do you It depends on the style, of course. But let's say if it's something that requires a live orchestra, would you go out of your pocket to record it?
I don't think I would do that now.
Mm.
It's just too risky.
Yeah.
Unless it was like something like amazing that the only way to do it would be with that. But it's costly, and the samples are just so good to at least get you the job.
Yeah, to deliver the idea. All right, and
Yes.
Now time for our 3 blitz questions.
Okay.
All right, so here's the first one, and that's name 3 of your most favorite soundtracks, either for film or games, doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, I mentioned Blade Runner, so that's probably one of my top soundtracks. 3 soundtracks. Let's see. That's a tricky one. Let's see. I'm trying. I could tell you. Okay. All right. So like the Mission soundtrack, Ennio Morricone.
No, nice. Okay. Gabriel's oboe. Yeah.
Gabriel's oboe. That one. I heard the soundtrack before I ever saw the movie. It was many years later before I saw the movie, and the soundtrack was just so evocative. So those 2, and I'm trying to think. Maybe actually, one that I really like that maybe is unexpected is Chaplin, which is John Barry. He was one of my favorite composers as well. And I don't know if you've seen that one with
Chaplin. No, I haven't. I know of John Barry, of course, but haven't heard.
That was Robert Downey Jr. played Charlie Chaplin, and it was a very haunting score, but it also had jazz elements.
Nice.
Yeah, but it's very, I don't know. It's just, I love his style. John Barry is one of my favorite composers. I used a lot of, the ninths and the sixths that he uses.
Yes.
in his music, and it's very lush, right? Lush and kind of romantic, which I'm a sucker for that. That was 3, right?
All right. Do you know one weird thing? Do you know that Ennio Morricone was, when he was young, he was part of this group of composers and musicians in Italy. Do you know this?
Yeah, I forget the name, but yes, I did know that.
And because he's a trumpet player, so they tried weird stuff like playing the trumpet with like a oboe mouthpiece. And but this is what led to the baritone electric guitar in all the westerns, the classic, which is now regarded as a classic, but then it was like, whoa, what's this? Cool. And what? So question number 2 would be: what would your dream project be?
Oh, that's a good question. My dream project. I mean, I definitely a film. Like that would be what style? Like I'm maybe something like really dramatic. Obviously like or fan, someone like Steven Spielberg, obviously like that kind of scope would be my dream project, is something that just like has a really, impactful. It doesn't really matter to me what genre of music that it would be, other than something original. And I do like writing for large orchestras or medium-sized orchestras. That's always my favorite part of a project, is whenever I get to conduct an orchestra and hear my music being performed by a group of real humans in a room is just like so special.
Yeah, it is definitely.
Oh. All right. Actually, yeah. It's almost the music making part of it is my favorite thing rather than the project, right? So any project that will bring me like Abbey Road Studios, that's gonna be nice. a dream.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed. You get tired of it. Yeah. All right. And final question, and this is a very tricky one, because you've had this like really successful career. You've worked on a lot of projects, different mediums. But what would be your advice to a younger Jamie, to a younger version of yourself?
Yeah. Good question. A version of myself, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe don't worry so much.
Mm.
Don't stress out as much, and don't take it as seriously maybe as I did. I'm not saying it's not a serious thing, but life is serious enough. So like, don't add to the stress of life. Just kind of do your best and go with what your instincts are.
That's a good advice. Yeah, I've always stressed when it comes to writing music, and I'm still fighting this every day.
It's a fine balance. We want the projects to be good, but if it takes a toll on your mental health and things like that, maybe it's too much.
That's right. Well, thank you. I mean, there's still a lot of things that I think we could cover.
We could do part two.
Part two, yeah, definitely. But I was told that to keep things under 1 hour. So repeatedly told. So sorry if I carried away. And
no.
Yeah, thank you for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure. Hope you enjoyed it too.
Yeah, thanks for having me, George. And I'll look forward to it.
All right. Cheers.
Have a good one. Bye.